My name is Clem Doran, and I turned 70 last spring. I've always believed in doing things properly, sheets ironed, bills paid early, kindness extended even when it isn't returned. Old habits from a life spent keeping order in a hospital billing office and a marriage built on schedules. Since my husband Walter passed 8 years ago, I've kept our little house in Portsmouth running like clockwork, polished the silver on Tuesdays, changed the linens on Fridays, baked cranberry pie every December 24th. That morning, frost had gathered along the kitchen window like lace, and the air smelled faintly of cloves from the candle I kept burning for company. I'd just set the pie on the cooling rack when I reached for the phone. "Brenna," I said when she answered, my heart lifting at the sound of her voice. "What time should I come tomorrow? I was thinking of bringing the pie warm if you'd like." There was a pause, the kind that prickles. Then her voice came light, distracted. "Oh, Mom, about that. We didn't have room this year. His parents are here, and the dining room only fits 10. I thought I'd misheard. "No room," I repeated, softly. "Yeah, it's just one of those things," she said. "Next year." "Okay," I made myself smile, though she couldn't see it. "Of course, sweetheart. Next year." We said our goodbyes. I set the phone down, the warmth draining from my hands. The house hummed in its quiet way, the baseboard heaters clicking, the old clock marking each second too loudly. On the dining table sat the extra chair I'd already polished, its cushion freshly steamed. I stared at it until the polish smell turned sharp in my throat. For years, I'd kept the table leaf stored behind the pantry door. The extension Walter had built himself, so there would always be room for one more. I ran my fingers along its smooth edge now, the wood cold under my touch. Outside, dusk pressed against the glass, and the first snow began to fall. I turned off the oven light, wiped my hands on the same towel I'd used since our last Christmas together, and whispered to no one in particular, "Well then." The next morning, I folded the tablecloth neatly away and began to think about how I might spend the day differently this year. The day after Christmas. The house was too tidy. The pie sat untouched in the fridge, and the quiet had a weight to it, like something pressing behind my ribs. I made tea I didn't really want, and opened the old cedar box on the kitchen counter where I kept things that used to matter: cards, receipts, photos, little proofs of a life spent tending to others. Inside was a birthday card from Brenna, 3 years old now. It said, "Love you." Mom, in a handwriting that looked rushed. The ink streaked where she must have signed it at a stoplight. No return address. No note inside. I leafed through the old photographs: vacations, holidays, graduations. In most, Brenna stood in the center, her husband beside her, their children bright and polished. I was there too, somewhere near the edge, half out of frame. Once, I'd laughed about it. "You always managed to catch me mid-blink." But now I noticed how often I'd been cropped out entirely in later albums she'd sent by email. A tidy little family with no sign of the woman who raised her. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded an old bank receipt from 8 years ago. The transfer to Brenna, $10,000. Walter had been gone only a month then, and I'd told her it was to help you and Jack start fresh. She'd hugged me tightly, crying into my shoulder, whispering she'd pay it back someday. She never mentioned it again. I used to tell myself that's what mothers do. They give time, money, forgiveness. They fill every silence with patience until there's nothing left of their own voice. But as I sat at the table with the tea gone cold, I realized something I hadn't before. This wasn't the first time I'd been left out. It was simply the first time I'd noticed I was gone. Outside, snow had begun to melt, dripping from the eaves in slow, deliberate rhythm. I folded the photos back into the box, slid the lid closed, and rested my hand on top of it for a moment before rising to wash my cup. A week after Christmas, the snow along the sidewalk had hardened into gray ridges, the kind that never quite melt until March. I was finishing the last of my morning coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. Brenna. Hey, Mom, can you watch the kids tonight? We've got a work dinner, starts at 6. No greeting. No question mark. Just the assumption. I stared at the message for a long moment. Thumb hovering over the screen. For years, my reflex had been immediate. Of course, sweetheart. I'll make macaroni. We'll watch a movie. That easy. Automatic yes that smoothed everything over. But this time, something inside me resisted. The chair I'd polished for Christmas was still pushed neatly under the table, unused. The cranberry pie had gone into the freezer in 2 neat halves. I thought of those small erasures, one stacked upon another, and the taste of cold tea from the day I'd realized how thoroughly I'd been cropped out of my own family's story. I typed, "I already have plans," then hesitated. My hands shook slightly as I pressed send. It wasn't a lie. I decided it was a declaration in progress. All afternoon, the sentence stayed with me, 3 small words that felt like scaffolding for something new. After lunch, I called the Portsmouth Public Library, where I used to take Brenna for Saturday reading hours. The woman who answered, cheerful and brisk, told me they were short a volunteer for next week's story time. I heard myself say yes before I could think twice. By evening, the guilt began to settle in, familiar as an old coat. Brenna hadn't replied, but I imagined her sigh, the raised eyebrows of her husband, the quick text to a sitter. For the first time, I let that image play out without rushing to fix it. I reheated some soup, turned on the lamp by Walter's old chair, and filled out the volunteer form online. Under availability, I checked Wednesdays and Fridays. It felt oddly significant, as though I'd just penciled myself into my own calendar for the first time in years. When I went to bed, the house was quiet, but it no longer sounded like emptiness. It sounded like space. The first Wednesday after New Year's, I bundled myself into my old wool coat and walked the 3 blocks to St. Mary's Parish Hall. The sign out front read, "Community Soup Night, all welcome." I'd seen it for years, always meaning to go someday. That evening, someday finally meant now. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of onion and broth, voices overlapping in a low, comfortable hum. Folding tables lined the walls, each covered in checkered cloths and mismatched bowls. A woman with silver hair tied in a red bandana stood at the serving line, ladling soup with brisk precision. "You knew?" she asked, smiling without pausing her work. "I suppose I am." I said, "I'm May," she offered. "Don't hover grab a ladle?" So I did. For the next hour, we served cups of lentil soup and small rolls, trading quiet comments between waves of hungry guests. May worked like someone who'd long ago made peace with repetition. Steady, calm, kind, without fuss. When things slowed, another woman joined us, a round-faced nurse named Lourdes, quick to laugh. Her accent curling around every word, she teased May about the soup being too salty. And May rolled her eyes in mock offense. "You 2 friends?" I asked. "Not by birth," May said. "By practice." After the cleanup, the 3 of us sat at one of the long tables with mugs of coffee. Lourdes talked about her grandkids in Florida, May about her cat, who was surlier than most ex-husbands. I found myself laughing real laughter, the kind that loosened something in my chest. When the hall emptied, May gathered her coat and said, "You coming next week? If you'll have me," I said. She grinned. "A woman's piece is like fine china. Once cracked, everyone pretends not to notice. Best keep it on a high shelf where you can see it." That night, as I walked home through the cold, I thought about that line, the careful guarding of something fragile and hard-won. The porch light glowed through the frost, and for the first time in weeks, it looked like invitation rather than reminder. I went inside, hung up my coat, and added soup night Wednesdays to the small calendar pinned beside the phone. By mid-January, the snow had turned to slush, and the town wore that colorless look winter gets before the thaw. I was slicing carrots for soup when my phone vibrated on the counter. The family group chat, the one Brenna had created years ago and mostly used to post pictures of the kids, lit up with new messages. Brenna, Mom's been weird lately. Her sister-in-law, Dana, replied almost instantly. Maybe she's just lonely. A few more dots appeared, a digital chorus of sympathy, concern, and subtle accusation. She needs something to do. It must be hard for her. Maybe Brenna, you should go see her more. I stood there reading it, the knife still in my hand, feeling my chest tighten. None of them realized I was in the chat, or maybe they did and didn't care. Either way, it landed the same. I wiped my hands, set the knife down, and scrolled back through the thread. Every message was a small performance, everyone trying to sound kind, while stitching me neatly into a category: old, lonely, inconvenient. The phone rang a few hours later. Brenna. Her voice was careful, too smooth. Mom, I saw you read the messages. I didn't mean for it to sound bad. We were just talking about how you've been different lately. Different. I repeated. Well, she said, you didn't come for Christmas, and you've been distant. I didn't mean to exclude you, you know. It's just logistics. With his parents and the kids and all. I leaned against the counter, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Logistics don't decide love. Brenna. People do. There was a silence, then a sigh. You don't have to be dramatic. I'm not, I said softly. I'm just tired of pretending things don't hurt when they do. Her breath caught a small sound, like she hadn't expected the sentence to land. I'll call you later, she said, and hung up before I could answer. I stood there a while, the soup simmering behind me, steam fogging the window. Outside, the evening light dimmed across the snowbanks, and in the quiet that followed, I felt something steadier than anger settle in. It was the sound of my own boundaries taking shape. The call came just past midnight, the kind of hour when bad news knows it can find you. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and Brenna's name filled the screen. Mom, she said as soon as I answered, her voice tight, almost breathless. It's Ella. She's burning up. I've given her Tylenol, but it's not working. Can you come? Please, I sat up, the old reflex already moving through me. Slippers, coat, keys before my mind caught up. Where's Jack? He's on a flight to Chicago, she said quickly. I can't drive her like this, and urgent care's across town. I pulled the curtain back. Outside, snow drifted sideways across the porch light, soft and relentless. Every part of me wanted to go, to step back into that familiar role of fixer, the mother who never hesitated. But the last time I'd driven across town in the middle of the night, it had been for Brenna's promotion party, the one I'd funded, the one she'd barely thanked me for. Listen, I said, keeping my voice even. Ella needs a doctor, not a tired grandmother on icy roads. I'll call a taxi to take you to urgent care. I'll cover the fare. Mom, it's already done, I said, opening the rideshare app with hands steadier than I expected. They'll be outside in 6 minutes. Grab a blanket and go. There was silence. Then a quiet, okay. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the wind slip through the siding. I imagined Ella's flushed little face, Brenna's worried hands, the two of them stepping into the cab. My heart ached, but not with regret. More like the soreness that follows a long overdue stretch. A faint buzz from my phone, a message from May. Couldn't sleep. You okay? I told her what had happened. A minute later, her reply lit the screen. Saying no to rescue isn't cruelty. Clem, it's trust in their adulthood. I set the phone down, turned off the lamp, and lay back. The house was still. The snow kept falling, and for once, I let someone else do the saving. The morning after Ella's fever scare, The sky over Portsmouth was the color of pewter. I sat at the kitchen table, the one that had seen birthdays, arguments, and every kind of apology except the one I needed. The teapot hissed softly on the stove, and a small stack of unpaid bills waited in the corner, but I wasn't reaching for those. Instead, I pulled a sheet of stationery from the drawer pale blue, the kind I used to write to Walter when he was stationed overseas. My handwriting had changed since then. Slower, shakier, but still careful. I began simply, "Brenna, you are always welcome in my life, but not entitled to it. I won't trade my dignity for proximity. I raised you to be capable. Let me believe you are." The words came easily, almost like they'd been waiting years to be written. I read them twice, making sure they were kind but firm, then added one final line. "When you're ready to talk as equals, I'll be here." I folded the letter neatly and slid it into an envelope. The sound of the paper closing felt final, like a door clicking into its latch. Before sealing it, I paused, staring at the table before me, the same table Walter had built from maple when Brenna was small. In those days, the leaf stayed in year-round because our house was full of neighbors, friends, and family stopping by. After Walter died, I removed it, telling myself it was easier that way. Fewer people, less noise. A memory surfaced the afternoon he'd shown me how to fit the leaf into place. He'd rubbed the edge of the joint with candle wax so it would slide smoothly, and said, smiling, "Every family needs room to grow, Clem, even when it feels tight." I'd believed him then. I still did. Only now the kind of growth we needed wasn't about space on the table. It was about space between people, the kind that lets love breathe if it's meant to survive, too. By noon, I walked to the post office, dropped the envelope through the slot, and felt something shift inside me, not a breaking, but a settling, the kind that sounds like quiet. It was just after 5 when the knock came sharp, hurried, echoing through the house before I'd even turned on the porch light. I'd been reading in Walter's old chair, the one that creaked like an old ship, when headlights swept across the living room wall. Outside, the air had that heavy stillness Portsmouth gets before a storm. When I opened the door, Brenna stood on the porch, her mascara streaked and her coat half-buttoned. The car idled at the curb, exhaust clouding around the tires. "Mom," she started, her voice raw. "I can't do this anymore. David's parents think I'm heartless. The kids keep asking why you don't come around. Please, can we just fix this?" I stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. She hesitated, then crossed the threshold like someone entering a memory they weren't sure belonged to them anymore. I went to the kitchen, poured milk into a pan, and reached for the cocoa tin. The motion steadied me. "Do you remember," I said quietly, "how you and your dad used to sneak extra marshmallows when you thought I wasn't looking?" Her shoulders softened for a moment before the tension returned. "Mom, I didn't come here for nostalgia. I know," I said, handing her a mug. "But warmth helps." She sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the cup, but not drinking. "You've made your point. You wanted space, you got it. But you're punishing me. And everyone can see it." "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm setting terms. Visits are welcome. Obligation isn't." Her voice rose, sharp now. "You'll end up alone. You know that. No one can live like this, cut off. Stubborn. Self-righteous." I met her eyes. "Maybe, but I'd rather be alone in peace than surrounded in pretense." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the kitchen clock and the low hum of her car outside. Brenna pushed back her chair, the legs scraping the floor. "I don't understand you anymore," she said. "I think that's a start," I replied. She turned and walked out, the cold rushing in behind her. I stood by the door, the cocoa cooling in both mugs, and watched the taillights disappear into the dark. By February, the light had started to change longer mornings, gentler shadows across the kitchen floor. The house no longer felt like a waiting room. It felt lived in again, that Wednesday. May and Lourdes came over with their usual energy, May carrying a loaf of bread still warm from the oven, Lourdes balancing a pot of stew that smelled like garlic and thyme. They filled the house the way laughter fills a song easily, without trying. We ate at the kitchen table, bowls steaming, the conversation tumbling from one story to another. Lourdes told a tale about a man at the grocery store who tried to flirt with her over avocados. May rolled her eyes and said she was only jealous because no one flirted in the produce aisle anymore. I laughed until I felt something loosen inside me. Something that had been tight for too long after they left. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was contented. Like the quiet after a hymn, I gathered the dishes, humming to myself. And when I opened the storage cabinet to put the bowls away, my eyes landed on the table leaf. The maple wood was dusty, but sound. The same piece Walter had crafted decades ago, so there would always be room for one more. I lifted it out carefully, wiped it clean, and set it on the counter. The surface caught the afternoon light, honey-colored and warm. For a moment, I imagined Walter at his workbench, sawdust in his hair, smiling at how deliberate I'd become about space. The phone buzzed beside the sink. Brinna Sunday lunch. Just us. I'll bring dessert. I read the message twice, then glanced at the leaf. Slowly, I cleared the table, slid the extensions into place, and locked them in with a soft click. The sound was simple, but it felt like a promise not of return, but of readiness. When I finished, I set out 4 plates, 3 for the people who had already shown up, 1 for whoever might come next. The air smelled faintly of soup and lemon oil, the house still warm from company. Room at the table, I thought, isn't found, it's chosen.